Awesome. Welcome all. I can see everybody coming in. So thank you all for coming in and joining us in this great conversation. And without much delay, we are going to start this conversation because we have a very important guest today and somebody who's going to help us tremendously. See, I'm putting words already. So let me introduce you to Miss Andrea Horwath, who's the leader of the official opposition in Ontario and the leader of the NDP party. Andrea, thank you so much for coming and spending time with us over the next half an hour and answer some question because as you know, we have had conversations before of the importance of food and food security, and especially in the student world where uh, it is often overlooked and students are left high and dry. So I'm so thankful that you understand the importance and you're here to have that conversation. So before we get going much further, I'm going to take a quick minute to do a little bit of land acknowledgement because that is really important to us. And the land that we are standing on today is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. We are mindful of broken covenants and we strive to make this right with the land and with each other. We are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers, immigrants, newcomers, and in this generation or generations past. I would like to also acknowledge those of us who came here forcibly, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. Therefore, I honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent. So, we're going to start with having a couple of questions that we got from some of the students who sent to us, and I'm going to jump right into it, Andrea, if you're okay with that.
Absolutely, Suman. Thank you for inviting me to do this. I'm very much excited about having this conversation.
Thanks a lot, Andrea. So the first question, so the COVID pandemic has highlighted the vulnerability of the post-secondary students. A recent survey in a college campus in Ontario identified 48% students surveyed themselves as severely food insecure. According to a Statistics Canada survey, and entering the 2020-2021 academic year, 77% of students were very or extremely concerned about their finances due to fewer job prospects. We know that food insecurity is deeply connected to income security and affordability. What do you think that the government should be doing to help students with food insecurity and instability at this time?
Well, thanks very much for the question. And I have to say the numbers are just heartbreaking. I mean, to say that 50% at a college campus, almost 50%, are extremely or severely insecure in terms of access to food, and 77% writ large, statistically, that tells me that we have real structural changes that need to happen when it comes to our post-secondary education system, both in terms of ensuring that it's a more affordable endeavor for young people and students, and then to make sure that that we're providing opportunity for people to access good food on campuses. And when you look at how the cost of post-secondary education has ballooned in Ontario, and how the burden of that increased cost, that increased price tag, if you will, means that students are not able to nourish themselves. And that's the case because it's the tuition fees, right, that are going up, and the cost of residence, and the cost of rental in communities. If you're a student that's coming from another community, it tells me that we have to fix a number of pieces. We have to fix the tuition costs. We have to get those tuition costs down. We have to get the burden of debt off the back of students. Instead of student loans, we should be providing grants. The government shouldn't be profiting on the backs of students by, by having charging interest on top of your student loans. These are all things that we have brought to the table. But more than that, I mean, we need to, I think, have a consciousness about not only the lack of food security, but the lack of access to nourishing food, and what the lack of access does to the academic success of students. I mean, you can't be at your best academically. Your brain can't be firing on all cylinders if your body is malnourished, right? If you're not able to get the kind of nourishment that you deserve. And so, in the context of the pandemic, many of these things have become much worse. As the pandemic has made it more difficult for young people to work, for students to find jobs outside of their studying time. We know that the cost of post-secondary education hasn't changed, even though we have been urging the government to provide direct financial support to students, as well as direct reduction of tuition fees, for example, to help give students a bit of a break in the COVID context. But unfortunately, these requests are coming, they're landing on deaf ears. And instead of seeing the government at this point in time augmenting its support for post-secondary, but we see the opposite happening, right? We see government, this government, the Ford government particularly, cutting its support for post-secondary, cutting the support for students and OSAP loans and those pieces. And so when that happens, as we know, when the government's cutting the direct financial support to post-secondary institutions, where do they get the money to operate? Well, they get the money from increasing tuition fees and of course, bringing more financial or more international students, because now the international students, sadly and wrongly, have become a cash cow. I mean, it's kind of like that's the solution suddenly to the underfunded post-secondary system in Ontario, and that's not fair. It's not fair to the international students, and it's not fair to any of the student body, nor is it fair to to the faculty and the staff. I mean, we need to honor the value of our post-secondary institutions and fund them appropriately to take the burden off, the financial burden off of students, and remember the importance of post-secondary education, just in terms of our ability to globally compete, for example, our ability to be the innovators, whether it's in STEM, whether it's anywhere, to be the kind of society that we want to continue to grow into, and including things like arts and other kinds of programs, right? The social sciences. I mean, I think I'm going all over the map here, but the point is, if we value our post-secondary institutions and what they bring, what they create, what they how they help shape our society and our province, then we should be funding them properly and not just being okay with the financial stress on students and what that does to their ability to feed themselves. I mean, something so fundamental.
Yes, you were not all over the place. You touched on some very, very key points, which is really the issue is happening in all across Ontario with the students. But before we go to the next question, I just want to mention out to all our audience who's joined us here, if you have any questions that you would want to ask, please type it out in the chat. We have our team at Meal Exchange actually monitoring the chat for questions, and it'll be sent to us so I can ask Ms. Horwath the questions. So you brought something that is really interesting, and I want to dig into that a little more. You identified food as being a very fundamental and a priority. However, the food does not get the priority as it should on post-secondary campuses. Though we all know how important food is to education, we see food to be a part of, unfortunately, food is in the part of the same department as parking is in most post-secondary campuses, in business services or ancillary services. So poor, hungry students are often romanticized. I have heard people talking, and this is campus administration, saying, oh, being hungry is a part of student life. That's how they will learn, which is so fundamentally wrong. So, what do you think can be done or should be done to shift the way of thinking on post secondary campuses?
Well, it's really shocking that those are the kinds of responses that you get uh, when you beseech the administration, people who could change things, to actually have a look at this concern. It's kind of Darwinism, right? I mean, the people that can survive it literally the people that can survive it are going to be able to succeed in post-secondary education. And that's completely the opposite of what I believe, which is we should be opening the opportunity and the ability to succeed in post-secondary education to more people, not less. We should be, encouraging and supporting people to succeed, not simply suggest that they got to fight their way through, and we'll throw every hurdle at them possible, so that only the fittest will survive. I mean, it's just so completely the opposite of what I believe post-secondary education should be, and it could be. Right, it could be, because we know other jurisdictions are doing a much better job at accessibility, financial accessibility, quality, and fulfillment that happens for students in post-secondary education in other jurisdictions, other countries, other provinces. Frankly, right here in Ontario, or right here in Canada. And so what I think we have to start dismantling that myth that there's something at all of value in this romanticized idea, and we need to put the pressure on the decision makers, and whether that is administration at colleges and universities, and I think it is all of these things, whether that's the provincial government and whether that's the federal government. I mean, we need to shift the paradigm here. We need to make sure that we are not just saying this is wrong, but saying why it's wrong and how we fix it. And that's why I'm really just excited about and proud of the work that you've been able to do with the meal exchange, because it inserts itself. You're inserting yourselves and your voices and the voices of students into this conversation, into this situation. And I think, not doing that it would be problematic, but the fact that you're here and you're doing that and have been for some time now, it really does speak to the the kind of the necessary action that will help push for change. And so I want to congratulate you on that. But I think people have a misunderstanding of where we've ended up when it comes to post-secondary education. I think that people who don't have friends or family members in the post-secondary system right now really have no idea about how difficult it is, and I think that myth busting is something that's all of our responsibilities.
Exactly. One thing that boggles my mind is, in Canada, 50 years ago, we said food is a human right.
Yeah.
Then why is it 50 years later we are still we are going hungry, and students are led to fend for themselves when it comes to figure out good healthy food, which completely
Yeah, no,
boggles my
it
mind.
completely boggles my mind. In fact, one of my MPPs, Jill Andrew, who's the MPP for St. Paul's, has put a motion into the legislature that speaks exactly to this issue. A provincial food strategy that affirms the affirmation of access to food inclusive of fresh fruits and vegetables as a human right, and culturally and regionally addresses marginal, moderate, and severe food insecurity for all Ontarians. And so, I think it's really important to talk about students, obviously, specifically, but I mean, this idea of food, access to food as a human right, it's almost like it's not a thing anymore, which, how can we have gone that far backwards for this to continue to be a problem?
Exactly. uh, yeah, no, that totally makes sense. So that brings me to the next question, which came from a couple of students. So, what are some effective ways students can raise awareness about the issue of student food insecurity inequity and engage in the process of changing these policies. And perfect segue with Ms. Andrews's motion.
Sure. I mean, and she put that motion forward because I mean she's in tune with her community and in tune with what's going on there. But a politician becomes in tune when we hear the voices of our constituents, right? And so I would say get engaged, and I know it's hard. And I think this is another thing that we have to acknowledge. I mean, students are so busy just trying to eke out an existence while they're trying to succeed in their field of study. That it's easy for me to say get engaged, but exactly your organization is the kind of place that students can get engaged, right? And can add their voices, because I really believe that the voices of young people can make change. I mean, we always talk about young people as being the leaders of the future. I think that is nonsense. Young people are the leaders of today. I mean, just look at what's happening in terms of the environmental, the climate change crisis, and the activity that's going on around that. And I think more and more young people are standing up and using their voices to solve problems that should be solved, that should have been solved long ago, and that cannot continue to be swept under the carpet. So anything you can do to enlighten, to educate, to put pressure on your local representatives, for example, on your MPPs. I mean, we know that this provincial government has been cutting back funding for universities and funding for colleges, and so as we talked about earlier, that creates, the trickle down effect where it ends up being students paying the price. But if your MPP doesn't understand the impacts of their decision making on a budget that cuts post-secondary education, then then I just think that you telling them it would be helpful. Kind of educate them, because they don't know. And again, this issue of food insecurity and severe food insecurity. I mean, really, I don't think a lot of local representatives understand that that's even a thing. And so the more you can get your voice out there, the more you can collectively get that message across. I think there's a couple of levels on which that that engagement in the political process can be very, very helpful. I mean, I know that our last election campaign, we had a really good platform when it comes to not only students and affordability for students, but also acknowledging that young people need a break. I mean, you graduate your education with so much debt that it takes years before you can even start, plotting your path forward. And that's just not where I think that young people should be. So everything from pharmacare and dental care to affordable home ownership, to getting rid of student debt. I mean, that was part of our platform. We actually said in our platform, the government will take off of your back the student debt that you're currently carrying, because young people deserve to have hope that they're going to be able to try to make their dreams happen, instead of being dragged under by the prospect of years and years of debt repayment.
Wow, that's amazing. So that brings me to the next question: is now your hat of leader of the NDP party, and this comes from the students as well. What does the NDP think should be done to ensure that every student in Ontario has access to good, healthy food?
Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, I think a part of the access problem is what we've already talked about. So the financial piece. So assuming that we've done all of that, I think there are some really important opportunities to tie in our amazing capacity to grow local food, and to bring the kind of farming community, if you will, the agricultural community into the mix here. I mean, the opportunity to get fresh local food to campuses, to bring to bring a connection between the producers of the food, and we're we're very blessed all around the province to have significant, providers of agricultural products, but to kind of connect the campuses with food producers, but also to help create spaces where students can congregate to share food, can congregate to teach each other about their cultural foods, for example, from their own communities. I mean, let's face it, there's just such a great kind of opportunity to kind of to create connections and to create relationships and to create understanding through food. But we don't do any of that, and particularly don't recognize how valuable that could be on a campus, right? On a post-secondary campus, college or university. So I mean, and the creativity is there, but we don't support it. Do you know what I mean? And I have to say, I think student unions have been doing a lot of hard work when it comes to trying to find some solutions or work with students to come up with some solutions, but they need support. And we've seen an attack on student unions and student bodies by this particular government. And I think that just creates more tension, more difficulty, and more lost opportunity when it comes to solving some of these really big issues. Because I mean, whether it's food and access to food and access to good food, nourishment, or whether it's solving problems like sexual assaults on campus or sexual misbehavior by professors or administrators. I mean, finding safe spaces and providing supports for people who have had a trauma, mental health services and access to community-based mental health services. The students' unions have done some great work over these last number of years to provide that kind of help. And I think that's another opportunity. The food piece is another opportunity, but we need to be supporting and strengthening and respecting those bodies and not undermining them and calling them names and creating chaos around the work that they do.
Thanks a lot. I think that we are getting a lot of really amazing questions coming from students. And in the interest of time, I'm just going through and asking a couple of them. One of the questions, which is really close to my heart, and I would love to know what you think about, is do you think that there is a support from your side, from your party side, for an inclusion of a post-secondary student federally funded nutrition program and be a part of the national food policy that is put forward by the current government?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I think absolutely. There is absolutely room for that, and it's something that that I think that if we push, and I mean the royal we, like all of us, for that piece, then then hopefully we'll get some acknowledgement and then some action. And I think this goes back to the other question around, what can students do to raise awareness? And one of the things that you're raising, bringing to the conversation, is identifying where there already are some policies around food security, access to nutritional food, and making sure students as a group are identified separately as a key a key component of who needs to be pulled in and whose needs need to be addressed, right? Because sometimes that's not the case, right? We talk about low-income neighborhoods, of course. We talk about low-income families. We talk about regional and geographic kind of access to fresh fruits and vegetables and nutritious food. I think, for example, communities in the far north and these kinds of communities, but sometimes students are left off the list, right? Sometimes students are they're just not part of the mix. It doesn't dawn on the policymakers to include students as a group that needs to be specifically identified and strategies developed to ensure that they're part of the policy solution. So absolutely, I think it's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, you really, I can talk with you about these things for probably a few hours, which we know we don't have. But there is one last question. I'm looking at the time. But one last question I
Sure.
really want to ask about, because this keeps coming between from students a lot of times. And what are your thoughts about for-profit businesses operating on campus and having profit making out of feeding students? What are your thoughts about that, and what do you think?
Yeah, you know what? Sumit, it's like this is a big change that's happened since when I was in university. When I was in university, okay, it was like a long time ago. I get that, but it wasn't. It wasn't. The cafeterias weren't run by corporations. There wasn't a Tim Hortons or or a Subway or anything like that, like on the campus. Across the street or blocks over, or in communities where where there was lots of student housing, maybe. But certainly the corporatization of the access to food on campus is hugely problematic, because it's not about provision of nourishing food. It's not about a proper diet. It's about profit, right? And I have to say, I don't blame necessarily the universities and colleges for this, because what they're trying to do is reduce their overhead costs and get some rental money, right? And why do they have to do that? Because the funding has been squeezed, right? They've been facing budgetary pressures for a very long time now. And so they try to find creative solutions. And what's the solution? Well, we can just rent out the space to Tim Hortons, or we can rent out the space to this company or that company. We get revenue, and we don't have to spend money on cafeteria and staffing and all of that stuff. So we ended up here for a reason, and it's the same thing that's happening in hospitals, as you know. And I just think that's like the wrong way to go. Or if you're going to do that, then administratively there has to be an equal commitment to the provision of nourishing food that's not profit motivated, where there's no profit. It's about break even, or not for profit, however you want to describe it. Provision of food for folks. And I mean, I think in that model as well, you could also make sure that you're including culturally appropriate food. I mean, food that people want to be able to eat, that makes them feel that they can be who they are, and not have to kind of pretend that they love burgers when they're a vegetarian. It's one of those things that I think there's real opportunity there. And I really think if we are if we're serious about solving the access to nutritional food problem and the lack of security around access to food, we need to look at some of these solutions. I think it behooves us to do so.
Amazing. I think there's a lot of things I got out of this conversation, but two things that stood loud and clear to me. One is this is a systemic problem, and it needs a systemic solution. It's not just one campus. It's an overall, as a province, we need to work together to figure out a solution. And the second thing that strike me, and not strike me, but I took away from this conversation, is that time is now. And we need the students to all stand up together and ask for what is rightfully ours. So
No,
thank
I
you
agree
all.
with you. I agree with you. I agree with you so much, Suman. And I have to say, it's now is exactly the time also, because we're coming out of a pandemic, and some of these problems have become amplified, right? And their spotlight is showing now in ways that maybe it wasn't before. So now is exactly the opportunity to say, as we rebuild, let's make sure that we're fixing some of the crack, like we're filling the cracks, we're fixing the problems. We're not just going back to the same bad old way of doing things, but we actually have a chance, an opportunity to make real change in these kinds of systemic problems.
That's amazing. Any other last words before we wrap up? We are 2 minutes past our time.
No, I could probably talk to you about this for a long time as well. So we'll have to do it again. But thank you for engaging me in the conversation, and for the the opportunity to participate. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming. This means a lot to the students to know that there is a year in Queen's Park who's listening. So thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
All the
Take care,
best.
everybody. Have a very good afternoon.